Buenos días a los presentes. Soy Dulce María Blanco Ramos, coordinadora de Alumni e Inserción Profesional del Decanato de Ingenierías. Sean todos bienvenidos a la Semana de Incorporación a la Vida Laboral a la plática El futuro aeroespacial, que amablemente impartirá nuestro ponente y a quien agradecemos su disposición con la UPAEP. Les voy a platicar un poco sobre la semblanza de nuestro ponente. El doctor Charles es actualmente profesor de investigación en la Escuela de Biónica, Aeroespacial y Mecatrónica en la UPAEP. Su investigación incluye liderar un grupo de estudiantes y profesores para investigar volcanes activos en México. Ha contribuido en proyectos de satélites pequeños como Aztec SAC-1, Shiba-1 y Aztec SAC Constellation. Comenzó su carrera en Centro de Espacial Johnson de la NASA en Houston, Texas. Ha dirigido varios laboratorios y publicó artículos sobre avances científicos, lunares y de meteoritos, así como ha trabajado en Stock, California, para la Tierra y Luna de Ingeniería, operada por el astronauta José Hernández.
Primera pregunta, ¿hablan inglés? Ok, muy bien, muy bien. Sí, es muy importante. Bueno, yo voy a empezar esta presentación y después voy a presentar a mi amigo Eri González, que va a seguir con hablar de cómo llegamos a NASA. Entonces ya voy a empezar en inglés. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Charlie Galindo. I'm a geochemist. I worked for NASA for 30 years. And today, both Eddie Gonzalez and myself are going to talk a little bit about our career paths to NASA and how we got there. So the first thing I want to talk about is NASA is normally when people think about NASA, they think about Kennedy Space Station, rockets going up in space, etc. But it's way more than that. NASA is our research sensors. Not only do they explore space, but they also explore the Earth. So these are the different NASA centers shown here in this slide, and you can see that they're all over the place. I put some of the main ones here, the ones that I've worked with and where Eddie works. So if we look up here, this is where Eddie works at Goddard Space Flight Center. I worked at Johnson in Houston. Down here. Oops, sorry about that. We also currently are working with NASA Ames here and with the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. As they had said in my bio, we have designed 3 different satellites here in UPAEP. Well, we're designing 3. The first one we already launched and it was successful. That was called Aztec Sat-1. Aztec Sat-1 was we worked with NASA Ames. The second one that we're working on now is called Shiba-1. Shiba-1 is we're working with the United Nations and JAXA, which is the Japanese Space Agency. And then finally, the third one we're working on currently right now as well is called Aztec Constellation. Aztec Constellation is also with NASA Ames, but this time what we're doing is instead of just launching 1 satellite, we're launching 4 satellites. These 4 satellites will be operated by different universities. So there's universities like UNAM, UPE, UNAC, and the National Laboratory of Mexico. So each one of us are creating our own satellite. UPAEP is creating its own satellite. These satellites will work in conjunction to actually monitor, well, the future. This is just a test case. Will monitor movement of mammals in the ocean. And so we're creating this constellation so that when we put tags on, for instance, whales, and they move, those signals can be sent up to a satellite. So again, this is some of the projects that we're working on here at UPAEP, along with NASA. So who works at NASA? So again, everybody thinks it's just astronauts, but it's not. It's engineers, it's scientists, they're lawyers, there's accountants, everything that you would find in a city, there has to be at NASA. The NASA sites are like small cities. They even have their own water treatment plants. And so when you think about working at NASA, you don't necessarily have to be an astronaut. You can be all these different types of careers. And so here you can see different different people and of all different races. And that's another thing. All different races are here. And what we're going to talk about, unfortunately, to work for the US government, you have to be an American citizen. NASA is run by the US government. But Eddie's going to talk about how you, as a non-US government uh, person, can work at NASA. There are ways. Here's some of my past. Again, I have several projects that I've been working on here. I worked originally at NASA in the Lunar Laboratory, and then during that time also traveled to Spain and did some work in astrobiology, looking for life on other planets. One of the main things I do in my career at NASA was motivate students to go into science. And so that's why we're here today, both Eddie and I. Eddie and I met doing this. And I've known Eddie for probably 20 years, maybe more than that. I'm not exactly sure. It's been quite a while. And we met in traveling. So we met going to these exhibits, these different conferences and giving talks like I'm doing today. So without further ado, I want to go ahead and introduce Eddie Gonzalez. Again, he works at NASA Goddard in Maryland, and he'll talk a little bit about what he's done.
Perfect. Okay. So again, for the purpose of time, we're already at 11:20. This was my introduction to NASA, and I really wanted to work for the agency. And my friends would make fun of me. They thought that's crazy, or you'll never be able to do that. And adults the same. It's sad to me that in our culture, that when you come up with in their minds an unrealistic goal, saying, well, you should do something more practical. And I'll get into that in a minute. Go to the next slide. Yeah, if you're advancing, Charlie, I still see that slide with the Apollo 13.
I see Little Nerdy Kid, but I guess you don't see that one.
No, I still see crew of Apollo 13.
Okay.
There we go. No, you passed it. There we go. Okay.
Okay. So for some reason, I think when they put it on the slideshow, it's not showing up on your side.
As long as they can see it, I don't know how it looks to the students that are there. Can they see it okay?
Yeah, so we see Little Nerdy Kid right now.
Okay, all right. So being a little nerdy kid, as you can imagine, I was picked on a lot. Go to the next slide.
Did you see the change?
No, still seeing the same slide. There we go. Okay. So.
Bueno, puede cerrar al lado, ¿no? Para hacerlo más grande. Okay, we'll do it like this.
All right, perfect. That works. Okay, so for those of you, think back for a minute when you were 8 years old. For me, it's gonna take me a long time to do that. Charlie too, but for some of you that are in the room, it's not so bad. And when I was 8, I wasn't like other kids. I wasn't playing, riding my bike, or playing soccer, or playing football or baseball. I just read books. My mom used to tell me, don't get dirty, and I really took that to heart. And as you can see, I never wore like, tattered T-shirts and things. She always dressed me up really nice. So I never played. But for some reason, when I was 8, she decided to put me in baseball. And that was the best and the worst thing that could have ever happened to me at that time. I didn't know how to play. She handed me this glove, and I didn't even know what to do with it. So when I got to the tryouts, I made a fool out of myself. I was the worst player out there, and they picked one by one, and I was the absolute last pick. Go to the next slide. Oh man, did they make fun of me? Oh my goodness. and I was miserable. So this is the team that I was on. And the two men that you see there in the picture, there was actually three of them. Those are three of the most vicious, horrible adults I've ever met in my life. They made my life miserable. Not only were the kids picking on me and being bullies, these men were so bad because I wasn't an athlete like the other kids were. They used to tell me, no, go over there and sit down and we'll be with you in a minute. They never taught me how to play. So the whole year, I think I played one inning. And that one inning, I was horrible. And the coach would tell me, get out of there, go sit on the bench. Now, my father was working and so was my mom. So they didn't come to my games. They didn't know. And I would lie to them. Oh, yeah, I had fun. It was great. But I was miserable. And they made fun of me at school. And it was just a horrible situation. But I had a decision to make. Either I do something about that or I just continue down this path. And even as an 8-year-old, I knew that I wanted something different. So I know that Charlie's talked about networking, and I'm sure you've heard the terminology networking. It's so important to meet other people that are going to help you learn, or they're going to introduce you to somebody that can help you learn, or they can introduce you to somebody that could get you an internship, or introduce you to somebody that can get you that job. So you can buy that car, so you can get that bike, so you can take that class. Networking is the key to everything. So within here, go ahead and go to the next slide. Go to the next one. Okay, so for me, I needed to learn how to play baseball. And for me, it wasn't just about baseball, it was about learning something and being good at it. So a family moved in across the street from me. The gentleman used to play catch with his son. So I walked over there and I did my first networking, and he was my first mentor. And I asked him, will you teach me how to play baseball? And without getting into all the details, I practiced every day. And the next year, I was the best player. I was picked first. It wasn't like the year before that I was bad. I just didn't know how. So imagine when you were first learning, pre-calculus or geometry or history or anything for that matter. Initially, you're going to be bad at it. You can either give up or you can say, this is important to me and I'm going to learn and I'm going to get better. And every day I'm going to get better and I'm going to ask questions and I'm going to practice because it means something to me. If it doesn't mean anything to you, then you're not going to get better. You have to make a decision. And I believe this, that if you're passionate about something, that's what you're going to do. So when you're trying to decide what is it that I want to do, what class do I want to take, what do I want to research? If you're not feeling it and you're not practicing that every day, that's probably not your path. Your path is going to be the thing that wakes you up in the morning and you say, that's what I want to do. I can't wait to go do that. So my father was trying to teach me to be a perfectionist. And he used to tell me, I want you to play chess while everybody else is playing checkers. So I got my first allowance and he would give me a few dollars every Friday, but I had to wash my mom's car and his car. And if there was one thing wrong with it, I had to start all over and wash them both. That first weekend, I was washing cars for 12 hours. He kept finding something wrong with it. And I was so angry, I didn't even want to do it anymore. But that was the other thing he taught me too. Once you start something, you're not going to quit. So finally, about 3 weeks into this, and I was only doing this on the weekend, I was mastering washing and detailing the cars. And it would only take me about an hour and I would get my allowance. And I was very happy, but I hated it. And that's going to make sense to you in a little while. I'll go to the next slide. Oh, as I mentioned to you, you have to make a decision and say, this is what I'm going to do. You can't kind of do something, because if you kind of do something, then you'll kind of be successful. You'll kind of win. For me, it wasn't about that. I might not be the smartest person. I might not be the most athletic person, but I'm going to practice and I'm going to work real hard and I'm going to outwork you. You will not outwork me. And that's the mentality that I had. Next slide. And all of those lessons that my father taught me were gone. On Christmas Day, 8 days before my 13th birthday, he died in our home. And I was shattered. And so was my mom. And she disappeared. She was in a depression, and I didn't see her for about 3 years too. So it was just me at that point. Next slide. I'm going to skip that slide. Go to the next one. Okay, so these are some of this is the last picture that I took with my father on the right. And that's a picture of my mother and father. And the picture on the top left, it's a picture that reminds me that when I was 14, I ran away from home for 2 weeks. And when I decided to go back home, nobody knew I was gone. And that was a turning point for me because I realized I'm really on my own here. I needed to make sure that I hustled and I made money and I did all of these things. Otherwise, I wasn't going to make it in life, let alone just in school, just in general. Next slide. Yeah. So again, still being a kid and thinking like a kid, right about 2 weeks after I ran away from home, I was coming home from baseball practice, and I was pulled over by the police, and a whole bunch of them. It was probably about a dozen police cars, and they pointed their guns at me, and they beat the hell out of me. They took my baseball equipment. They handcuffed me, and they put me in the back of the car, and they kept me there for about a half hour, and finally they released me with no explanation. When I called to complain because they beat me up pretty good, they ended up keeping my name and harassing me for the next 4 years, which ruined me academically because I was always late for school after that. So overnight, I went from crayons to handcuffs. Next slide. Yeah. So when I was 15, that's when I started to think what I'm doing is not good, that my dad wouldn't be proud of me. And this is not what my dad taught me. Now, what you see here is a picture of gang members, cholos, and this was my environment. Now, I wasn't a gang member, nor was I a cholo. I had long hair. I rode a skateboard, my bike, same thing with my friends. But because being Mexican, being Latinx, being Hispanic, and not being a gang member, man, that came at a price, because we used to have to fight with them all the time because they thought we were trying to be white. Well, we weren't. We were just trying to be ourselves. We liked, classic rock, heavy metal, and they liked oldies, and nothing wrong with that. I like oldies too, but I mean, that was their lifestyle, and they couldn't understand our lifestyle. And the white people that were around us, they thought we were trying to be like them, so we had to fight with them too. It was just a horrible situation at the time. Next slide. Now, the slide deck that I was going to show you has a slide in between these two, and the slide is a picture of a car with about 30 bullet holes in it. So I must see my junior year, I was with a friend that, was a troublemaker, big time. I had no business being with him, to be honest with you. And we went to go get some donuts, and we were in the parking lot, and some guys that he had gotten into some trouble with the week before started shooting at us. So we hid in the car, and you could hear the bullets just hitting this car, and it got shot at it about 30 times. Now, he got hit. I did not, thank goodness. But after that, I was like, this is not the life that I want to lead. Obviously, the people that I'm hanging out with is getting me into a lot of trouble. And I really wanted to go to college. I really did want to work for NASA. So when I got ready to graduate from high school, that in itself was great because a lot of these kids that I hung out with, they ended up going to jail. They ended up leaving the city. Some of them got killed. Most of them got arrested or were in jail. But for myself, I wanted to go to community college, but my counselor said, you know what, I think you would do a really good job washing cars. And I thought that was ironic because my dad was making me wash cars over and over and over. What he was trying to do was, sure, you could do that, but is that what you want to do the rest of your life? Now, there's nothing wrong with that. Anybody that gets up in the morning and goes to work, I don't care what they do. I have so much respect for that, but that's not what I wanted to do. And I always tell, my children growing up, either you make a plan or the street's going to make one for you and you're not going to like it. You're going to end up doing something that you don't want to do if you are not passionate and you do not practice what it is that you want to do. So I was kind of stuck in that dilemma of what is it that I'm going to do now? Next slide. So I enrolled in a community college and I crushed it. I was doing so well for the first couple of semesters, but then I got my girlfriend pregnant. And okay, now was that a mistake? Well, I have a son and I have a grandson because of this, right? But I had to delay everything that I was hoping for. So they didn't have online learning. So I had to put my school away and I had to find a job that had benefits. Next slide. So I got a job delivering mail, just an entry-level position at this law firm. And I never thought that I would excel at this firm. And for many years, I gave up on NASA. I stopped thinking about it because this was my career. And I was doing some amazing things there. Pretty soon I was a coordinator, then I was supervisor, then I was manager, then I was senior staff. Now, a lot of you don't know who this person is in the middle, but if you look him up, his name is Warren Christopher, and he was Secretary of State in the Clinton administration. He was also the commissioner for the Christopher Commission, and that happened after the Rodney King incident and the Los Angeles riots, and I was coordinator for that commission. Next slide. And finally, after being at that firm for, 17 years, I didn't have the academics behind me, but I had the experience to get the job at NASA. So this was my second career. And I worked at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And I worked there off and on for 17 years. And in between that, I worked at NASA headquarters on a detail. I also worked at NASA headquarters on a fellowship. And I worked at Kennedy for a little while. And I did some work at Johnson, at Stennis, at Wallops, at Armstrong, at Ames. I've had the luxury of being at every center and doing work there. But finally, I am now at NASA Goddard. Next slide. Yeah, so one of the cool things is I actually got to meet Gene Kranz, the flight director from Apollo 13, and one of the astronauts, Fred Hayes. And that actually was at where Charlie worked at NASA Johnson. There was an event going on and they happened to be there. So I was able to meet them and tell them, you're the reason that I work for NASA. Next slide. Yeah, so these are some students that I've mentored over the years. And I was doing a TED Talk in Los Angeles. And it just goes to show you about networking. And if you're doing the right things, then people want to work with you. So the organizer came up to me and said, there's somebody that wants to meet you. He wants to know if you will go to his event and do a talk. And I said, sure, I'd love to meet this person. And that person was, go ahead, next slide. It was Jack Black. Now, here's the weird thing about that is that his mom was one of the engineers, aerospace engineers, that created an algorithm that helped bring the astronauts home safely from Apollo 13. So again, I keep thinking that the universe really wanted me to do this. Or I was really praying and manifesting this because I kept getting constant reminders of when I was 5, Apollo 13, and here it is again. Next slide. I show you this because this is what networking 101 is. When I was working at NASA in the very beginning, my first couple of years, I met this person. We developed a really good relationship. He lived in DC, I lived in LA. And we would see each other a couple times a year and we would reach out and we were friends. And in 2018, when I decided to move to Washington, DC, he was very instrumental in getting me a job at Goddard. Next slide. Okay, so one of the other things that I want to share with you as far as recipe for success is you never know when opportunity is going to come in front of you, right? So for those of you that went through the pandemic and you were going to school online and you've been in Zoom meetings, this is typically what it looks like. Next slide. And sometimes you don't know the people that are on the line and you're not sure what they do. You can do one of two things. You can ask questions. Hey, what is it that you do? What is it that you're studying? What's your major? What school do you go to? What is it that you want to be? and network and potentially help each other. Next slide. And it could turn into this. So that's what happened to me. I was doing something at Goddard and I got the job there, but I wasn't happy. I wasn't doing what I'm doing today. But I was in a meeting with somebody else and I decided to have a conversation with that person, not knowing what that person did. What turns out that other person who wasn't smiling initially is in part of employee development. And he told me, why don't you tell me about what you do? So I did. And he said, I've got a position for you. So I ended up getting this huge promotion for taking the time to speak with this person. And that's the reason I have the position that I have today. Next slide. So this is the job that I had a few months ago. My title actually changed to Program Manager for Culture, People, and Equity. But if you Google NASA People of Goddard, and somebody had pointed this out to me, I didn't even know, my picture actually comes up. So I must be doing something right. Next slide. And here are some of the mentors and people that are in my life that have helped me professionally and even personally. I can't even begin to tell you how important it is to get mentors, and not just one or two, but a group of mentors. Somebody that can help you academically, somebody that can help you professionally, and somebody that can help you personally. You need to make sure that you have a group of mentors that can help you, people that have been there and that have done that. Next slide. Charlie Bolden, former administrator for NASA. I had the pleasure of working with him. Next slide. Leland Melvin, former manager, former astronaut rather, and also a real good friend of mine. Next slide. And the famous Jose Hernandez, such a great human being. He also wouldn't take no for an answer. He had a plan, he followed it. It took a lot longer than he would have hoped, but he actually fulfilled his dream. The picture in the middle is a picture of Jose, our friend Jennifer, our friend Gabe. I don't know if you've met him or not, but I know he's been to Puebla many times. Charlie and myself. Next slide. And for the purpose of time, there's this little video that I want you to see, but I don't know if you're going to be able to hear it. So let me just share what it is. This is Will Smith portraying a gentleman by the name of Christopher Gardner that I had mentioned earlier. And the company that he was interning at was called Dean Witter. 1,400 candidates, and they were only going to hire one person. And he needed that job. He was homeless. And if you saw the movie, Will Smith's son actually portrayed Chris Jr. And he was about 5 years old. But in reality, Chris Jr. was 14 months old. What Chris had to go through was pushing a stroller, changing diapers, buying formula. And it was a very, very tough struggle for him. While all the other interns could work 10 hours, he could only work 6. So he had to get 10 hours worth of work done in 6. It goes back to my original message. How bad do you want it, and what are you willing to do to get there? And if you're willing to sacrifice some things, whether it's sleep or whether it's going out with your friends, partying and doing all of that and saying, no, this is what I want, and I want this more than anything else, you'll obtain it. Next slide. Yeah, so as I developed my group of mentors, this was somebody that I wanted in my life. And I remember telling my friends, you know, I'm going to meet him and we're going to be friends someday. And they were like, oh, man, get out of here, man. You're crazy. And again, it's the culture, right? How many times have your friends told you that, or even your family? But for me, it's like, no, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make this happen. Let me take a step back for a minute before we go further. One of the other things too, when I came to NASA, was I was fascinated by the moon rocks. I mean, just fascinated by them. Imagine a rock that was on another place besides this planet. And again, through prayer and manifestation, it put me together with Charlie. And I remember when I went to Johnson, him taking me into the clean room so I could actually hold on to these moon rocks with my hands. Now, I didn't touch them with my bare hands. It was this contraption that Charlie can explain better than I can. But the fact that I was able to meet Charlie and he turned out to be not only a friend, but a brother to me, but I was able to touch these rocks. And when I tell people that story, they're like, get out of here. And I'm like, no, I've actually held a moon rock in my hand, and I know the person that's a curator of over these rocks, right? So again, anything that you want to do, if you're willing to put in the work, you can make that happen. Next slide. So I met him. I got his business card. And furthermore, next slide. We became friends. I met him, we sat next to each other on a plane, and I got to tell him my story about, why it's important to give back to the community, to make sure that our people, or people of color, are given opportunities to do whatever it is that they want to do in the STEM field. Next slide. Again, one of my mentors, Warren Christopher. Next slide. Joletta Patrick. She is now working back at NASA headquarters, working for Bill Nelson, who's the administrator for NASA right now. Next slide. And Christopher Gardner. We've done a lot of work together. He actually did a keynote at NASA Goddard in August of last year. Next slide. And together during the pandemic, both Chris Gardner and myself, we spoke to over 1,000 high schools, telling them, you can do whatever it is that you want to do if you're willing to put in the work. Next slide. And this is my wife. And talk about networking. I met her at a science conference in 2016, and she's the reason I moved to DC. And we're now married, and we live here, and I love her, and she's amazing. She's the CEO, president, and founder of her own tech company. She's a professional artist. She's a former professor, and just an amazing person. Next slide. And we were supposed to get married in California, but because of the pandemic, we were unable to travel. So we got married on our terrace here in Washington, D.C. Next slide. And these are all of the different students that I've mentored over the years. A big believer in giving back. Next slide. And this is just a couple of things that NASA has recognized me for, and I really appreciate that. I've had the privilege and honor of winning over a dozen different NASA awards over my years. In fact, I just won one recently that I'll be getting in June. Next slide. James Webb, that's just one of the recent missions along with the Parker Solar Probe that is headed to the sun. Next slide. And this is where I work. And finally, the last slide, Charlie. If you want to scan that, that will give you all of my contact information and different links that are important, whether it's USA Jobs or where can I submit my resume, and just a whole bunch of different links. Or if you want to follow me on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, it's all right here on this QR code. And Charlie, I wanted to make sure that we had enough time for questions. I'm sorry if I spoke real fast, but I wanted to get through to the end so I could answer questions from people, whether they're online or they're in the classroom.
Thank you, Eddie. Does anybody in this room have any questions?
Thank you so much, Eddie, for sharing your experience with us. And I only have one question. How would you suggest us on creating our own group of mentors? Because you mentioned a lot of times that it's important to create a really good networking. So I want to ask you, how would you suggest us to create or get as some mentors?
Yeah, so the first thing that I would do is I would go the easy route and get a mentor at the university that you're at, right? And here's the thing. Every question you don't ask, the answer is going to be no. So you have to ask. So for example, I don't want to put Charlie on the spot, but Charlie would be a great mentor. And he's probably doing a lot of mentoring right now, and people don't realize that he's actually mentoring them. So I would probably start with a professor or a counselor or a teacher, a local business person, somebody that you feel comfortable with. And just so you know, and this is important to know as well, is not everybody's meant to be a mentor. So even though they're successful, they may not have the knowledge and the know-how to share their recipe for success. So don't be offended if it doesn't work out, just find somebody else. Now, after you've got your first mentor, and maybe you meet once every 2 weeks or once a month, or whenever you have a particular issue or subject that you want to talk to them about, then you can start finding other mentors. And how do you do that? You can utilize LinkedIn. So let's just say that I was looking for somebody that worked at NASA. It's important to me to have somebody that is Mexican, somebody that is aware of both cultures, both in the United States and Mexico, and say I find Charlie. So what could I possibly say to him to get his attention? This is what I would do. I would Google Charlie Galindo, and I would see some of the work that he's done, some of the research papers he's written, maybe a workshop that he's completed or talks that he's given. So now when I reach out to him on LinkedIn, I'm going to say, Charlie, I read your research on Mars rocks for this, that, and the other. I'm in the same field as you, or I'm trying to get to NASA. Would you consider having a 15-minute coffee Zoom with me? No, I think that Charlie, well, I know because he's such a kind person, he would take that 15 minutes to speak with me. And I'm pretty sure after I ask him questions about his career, that Charlie's going to ask me some questions. And I'm going to say, man, I want to be where you're at. That's what I want to do. Can you tell me or teach me the recipe that you have? And then he'll share that with me. I might even ask him, is there anybody else that you might want to connect me with that you think could potentially help me or support me, right? That's how you find mentors. That's how you build your network. So if you are an aerospace engineer or if you are a research scientist, I would type in top 10 research scientists at NASA or top 10 aerospace engineers at NASA or in the industry, whether they're at SpaceX or Virgin Galactic or Blue Origin or wherever, right? The same rules apply. I'm going to Google these individuals. I'm going to learn about them. So when I reach out to them on LinkedIn, I have a message for them that they can connect with. A lot of students will connect with me and say, hey, I'd like to join your network. Okay. And that's it. I'm thinking, okay, they just want to build their network. But there's the 1% of students will say, Eddie, I heard that you're a sneakerhead. I know that you've been with NASA for over 20 years. Would love to talk to you for 15 minutes. In fact, I'm going to meet one of those students today, this afternoon. This person took the time to Google me and tell me about some of my work. And of course, she got my attention. So I'm going to provide some of the things that I'm providing to you to this person as well. That's how you do it.
Okay, thank you so much, Eddie.
You're welcome. Anybody online have any questions?
¿Alguien que tenga preguntas y que esté conectado en línea? En el chat, a ver. Si quieren pueden hacer la pregunta en español y aquí nos apoyan con la traducción.
Aquí. Le damos gracias al doctor Charles a Edward por tomarse el tiempo para compartirnos su conocimiento a través de esta ponencia y a nombre de la directora, la maestra Gesael García Flores y el Departamento de Egresados y Relaciones Interinstitucionales, queremos entregarles el siguiente reconocimiento por impartir esta ponencia.
Very cool. Hey, Charlie, is it okay if I say some closing words?
Sure, of course.
Thank you. So I want to piggyback off what Charlie said earlier, and that is it takes a village to run NASA. If there is a profession that you can think of, there's a place at NASA for you. So again, think of STEM. Always stay involved with STEM or STEAM rather, add art to that. So let's just say that you're an art major, graphic designer. You can help design our mission patches, or you could help create astronaut suits, right? There's so many things that you can do. If you're a math whiz and you can do budgets for our projects and our missions. If you want a law enforcement, we need security to protect our centers. All of these different positions that you can think of, you could be a part of NASA. Now, Charlie had mentioned earlier from an international perspective. Now, here's the thing. NASA is a US government-based agency. So obviously you've got to be a US citizen to become a civil servant and work at NASA. I'm not a civil servant. I'm a contractor based out of a university called Catholic University. So if Catholic University was to write a proposal to say, we're going to do research for NASA, right, for the next 3 years, and I'm going to need 3 or 4 students and potentially collaborate with universities in Mexico, including Puebla, once they win that proposal and we send the funds to them, they are free to bring in any international student from any university that they choose. So again, it goes back to networking and collaborating and working with other universities in the United States. Maybe you're a student that's studying in the United States, right? Same rules apply. If a proposal is written and is won, then that university can bring in international students to work at NASA. Also, too, being a contractor is not a bad way to go. I've been a contractor for over 20 years, and there are things that I can do that a civil servant cannot. And Charlie could tell you more about that. But I really embrace being a contractor. It allows me the flexibility to do the things that I do, especially the giving back part. So thank you so much for having me. If you have any questions, you have my contact information, or you can reach me through Charlie. So thank you so much for your time today.